Have you ever wondered why so many whiskey distilleries and whiskies start with Glen? You know, you got Glenfiddich, Glenlivet, you've got GlenDronach, you've got Glenfarclas, Glen Glenmorangie, and at some point, you've got to ask yourself, did Scotland just all of a sudden run out of names, or what's going on? Strange, to be honest, that every second whiskey distillery, sounds like it was named by the same bloke standing in, a windy valley holding a sheep or something. I don't know. So why do so many bottles of whiskey and so many distilleries start with Glen? And I suppose once you understand it, you'll never really look at Scotch whisky again in the same way. You walk into a whiskey shop, sounds like someone's casting spells from Harry Potter because there's so many Glens and so many different names. But are they related? And is it related in a certain way? It all comes down to geography, really, because, it's actually simpler than that, because the word Glen actually comes from Scottish Gaelic word. And Glen, it simply means a valley. And that's it, just plain and simply, just a valley. So Glenlivet, Glenfarclas, whatever, Glenlivet, Glenfarclas, Glencadam. They wanted to build the distillery in a valley because a valley had good water. It had access to barley. It had shelter. Isolation. Back then, of course, we're talking about the pre-license days. All of these places go back to sometimes. Hi guys, not often you get something for free, completely free in the whiskey industry. My tasting chart with all the descriptors are on there. Download it for free in the link below. Sláinte. Which Scotland has plenty of, especially valleys. Scotland's terrain, I don't know if you've ever seen it. If you haven't seen it live, you've seen it on television. It's very, very sparse, cold. So basically, hills, mountains, valleys, mist, sheep, you get the picture. So naturally, let's name the distillery after the valley, right? Simple and very, very, very Scottish. Tonight, I'm drinking a Thomson Whisky Rye Barley. It's a New Zealand dram, local distiller. It's bottled at 46%. And they do everything themselves down there. They've crushed, malted, fermented, double distilled through their hand-beaten copper spots. Good on you, Matthew Thompson. And Rachel, of course. So why were the distillery built in the glens? This is where it gets really, really interesting. Back in the 1700s, early 1800s, whiskey making wasn't legal. So the illicit stills were all over Scotland, but valleys, glens were the perfect hiding places. As I said, the fresh water, the remote location, the natural cover from authorities, and nearby farming communities. So basically the ideal setup, really, for quietly making whiskey on the side, pretending you weren't even there. Some historians estimate that there were thousands of illegal stills operating across Scotland, and modern distilleries, of course, grew out of those traditions and in some of those locations. So many places are Gaelic in origin, and whiskey distillers often borrowed, from the local geography, if you like. So Glenlivet, for example, a very, very famous bottle of whiskey, very famous name, roughly translates to Valley of the Smooth Flowing One. Glenfiddich, of course, means Valley of the Deer. That's a more common one. GlenDronach, Valley of the Brambles. Interesting. And Glengarach, which nobody outside Scotland can pronounce correctly in the first attempt, probably not myself either. Which is half the fun of it, isn't it? All these different names. But this is just really important. Just because the whiskey starts with Glen, it doesn't mean it belongs to a certain style or flavour, you'd have to say. Absolutely not. You can have a heavy sherried GlenDronach, for example. You can have a light Glenlivet, you can have a rich Glenfarclas, or you can have a smoky Glen Scotia. The name mostly reflects location and geography, nothing to do with flavour, style, or what have you. Though admittedly, you hear a whiskey who starts with Glen and you might automatically think, oh, I'm going to like that. And yeah, look, you probably will. That's the way it goes, But during the whiskey boom periods of the late 1800s and, again in the 20th century, distilleries with that traditional Highland style name sounded authentic, and authenticity sells whiskey. Let's be honest, Glenfiddich sounds far more romantic than Industrial Factory Number 4, if you understand what I mean. Just having another sip of this whiskey. So whiskey brand, you get the rye coming through, and it's got to say it's very, very nice. Whiskey branding heavily leans into heritage, landscape, tradition, mythology. And Glen instantly sounds Scottish to people around the world. Even people who know absolutely nothing, about whiskey hear Glen and think, oh yes, Scotland. Scotland missed old barrels. A man named Angus, standing dramatically on the hill. It's all an image. It's all a picture. It's all marketing. And the branding power really is quite enormous. Now, here's the funny thing, there's actually far fewer Glen distilleries than people think. It's a bit like discovering half your friends are named Dave until someone points it out. Suddenly Glen this, Glen that, another Glen. But Scotland also has, plenty and plenty, tons, far more in fact, of other names like Ardbeg, Lafroy. You've got Springbank, Talisker, you've got Oban, Brachlatic, Mortlock. You've got so many different brands, and so many different brands coming each year as well, we should say. Even today, newer distilleries, they're opening up. In fact, I mentioned in one of my previous reviews that I think there's 3 new ones coming just alone in Campbelltown, which is absolutely fantastic. So heritage, craftsmanship, authenticity, it sells. And Glen sort of sells, if you like. Whiskey, the story sort of matters. That's why even my last review, a mystery dram, a Highland dram, there's an eerie sort of mystery about it. And it's the reason so many Scottish whiskies start with glens, because Glen means in Gaelic, valley in Gaelic. It's distilleries that were built in valleys. Many were named after the local, geography. So the next time you see, Glenfiddich, GlenDronach, Glenfarclas whiskies, at least you'll spare a thought. You'll know a little bit about that sort of history. You're looking at, whiskies from a valley. So half sort of agricultural, half storytelling, half history. I know that's 3 halves, but you have to excuse me because I'm Irish, so 3 halves. So yeah, okay. So let me know, in the comments, what's your favourite Glen whiskey? And let me know how many you can name, because there's a few. I mean, there's Glenalky, there's Glencadam, Glendullan, Glenfiddich, Glenberg, GlenDronach, Gleneden, Glengoyne, Glengarrick, Glengrant, Glenglasha, Glenkeith, Glenlivet, Glenord, Glenmorangie. Easy for me to say. So how many can you name? Let me know in the comments. What do they come to you off the top of your head? And if you enjoyed the review, please subscribe, because it really does help the channel. And until the next time, we always like to say, drink responsibly and sláinte.